for 700 pages of 900 page novel, they're leading sometimes sad, sometimes disappointing, but quite exciting, adventurous lives together in a family.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that Marianne, she gets kicked out of the organization that she helped fund, the charity organization, and she moves to Palestine. And in fact, Lottie, the actress, her daughter Susie ends up living in Palestine with Marianne and gets engaged to a guy there. Hi, welcome back to the Big Book Project. I'm Lori Feathers, your host, and today I'm so happy to have joining me Nick Doring. Nick is the publicist at New York Review of Books, and we are here to talk about the 800-page wonderful novel Effingers by Gabriele Tergit and translated by Sophie Duvernoy. Welcome, Nick.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Um, This is a big book. It spans about, I don't know, 70 or so years of German history, starting in I think the first chapter, in the first page, we learn it's the 1870s. It not only takes us through a pretty long chronology of Germany from the 1870s to World War II, but we also go from countryside to Berlin, and some pretty radical, I'd say, changes that happen to the society and the culture during that time. But Nick, maybe you can kind of give us a little bit of a summary of what we're dealing with here in terms of the two families that we're going to be talking about.
Sure, and feel free to jump in. Um, it's about basically a Jewish German family. The Effingers, or I think someone actually told me it was Effingers this week, but I've been saying Effingers the entire time. I've been working on it. The Effingers are from the south. They're from Bavaria, I think, or they often call it Franconia. And the patriarch is a watchmaker. He's kind of an artisan in a smallish town, and he has two sons, Carl and Paul, who are more ambitious, and they leave his town, the southern town, to go to Berlin, where they start. Paul is kind of the capitalist. He's kind of the more industrious one, and in industry is the word. And he starts both first a screw factory, and then later a car factory. And his brother Carl is with him on all these projects, but Carl also quickly, once moved into Berlin, marries into a wealthy banker Jewish family that is already, well settled in kind of in the upper class of Jewish German family. They're still not quite the top tier because they're not aristocrats and because they are Jewish. And then Paul marries the sister to Carl's wife, so he's also in the family. And then they have children, and there are other members of the family. And as you say, yeah, from 1870s, and I guess it's. People often compare it to, although I guess this is a bit contested, Thomas Mann's Buddenbrooks, which also follows a German family of businessmen or business people, whether they are merchants in Lubeck. And that I actually don't remember when it starts, but that ends in 1870, and then this starts afterwards. And I think they're probably quite important moments in German, if not world history, particularly the Effingers, because of what everyone knows is to come in the 30s and 40s in the world, and how involved how much of Germany is the catalyst of that, um, and 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 yeah, and I guess 1870 might be the kind of hinge in these two books, or this beginning of this one, because it's when they beat the Franco-Prussian War ends, and Germany defeats France, and Germany's fully unified. And Bismarck is kind of a figure in the beginning of this book, as we kind of witness German history through this fictional characters, Jewish fictional characters' lives, and the progress and the rise of a new form of kind of modern capitalism. Is all very much part of the book.
Yeah, the modern capitalism part I found to be particularly interesting. You know, we learned pretty early on that Paul doesn't want to go into the watchmaking business of his father, and to say that it's a business. I think you more appropriately called the father a craftsman. You know, he's more of an artisan. He's not mass producing watches or anything. He's just kind of a very old fashioned watchmaker or fixer of watches and clocks around this small town. And um, Carl has or excuse me, Paul has plans. He wants to, I think, uh, start building something that would be a way to kind of get Germany into the world a little bit more. He's looking into the future, but industrialization and industrial manufacturing was something that was not really acceptable in the small town. You know, he goes to a bunch of people and talks about financing and starting up a factory, and you know, he gets kind of poo-pooed. Even when he goes to Berlin, it's not easy for him. And it's kind of interesting to think about. I mean, it is the 1870s, 1880s, but it obviously, I guess, took a little while for people to really think manufacturing was the way to go.
Yeah, and I think there's a class classist idea against mercantilism, and I guess that it's the suggestion that industry is they're very they're very bourgeois, even though they're rich, they're classic bourgeois, and because they're Jewish, they're allowed to do it. There's kind of one minor figure. There's a proper aristocrat who their bank the Uppners is the other side of the family from the Effingers, and they're his bankers, and he works with them forever, and he knows all of the family, but he won't socialize with them. And he's not a bad person, but he's just a kind of traditional, aristocratic German, and obviously he doesn't hang out with Jews. And so I think there's still that throughout the book, even up until the 30s and 40s. The other thing I guess I neglected to mention in my summary of the book, because I only mentioned men, and actually there are a lot of female characters in this book, wives, sisters, daughters, girlfriends, and they're a major part of the book too. And it's also kind of about, as well as business and industry, it's about fashion, and houses are a big part of the book, and arts, and how that all changed. And that's quite a radical change in the book too. The character, well, two of Carl's daughters, Lottie and Marianne, are artists. Marianne probably, and Lottie in particular becomes quite a successful theater actor, and you kind of get the sense that she's in the midst of kind of, I don't know, avant-garde Weimar, Berlin, artistic scene on the theater. I
You
mean,
had
I guess the theater is big.
Yeah, there are so many details in this book, like wonderful descriptions of large meals and parties, and a lot of detail about table settings and that kind of thing. And you had recommended to me a review of the novel uh, by the translator and writer Michael Hoffman, that's in the London Review of Books. And he talks about the documentary style of this book. And uh, I noted before we started, or when we started, that it was 800 pages, 810 pages, really. And there are 151 chapters, so short chapters. Um, and we don't get a lot of interiority or contemplation about what these characters are thinking about. There's not a lot of philosophical discussion outside of the dialogue. There's an awful lot of dialogue, and what we learn about these characters and what we learn about their society is comes through in the description of their lifestyles and in their conversations. There's hardly any exposition, I would say, in the book. And on the face of it, that might sound not that interesting, but she makes it really interesting and perhaps even more impressive. It feels like you're moving very quickly through an 800-page book.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Hoffman kind of, which is his review is a rave, and Michael Hoffman, um, many people know, is probably quite well known for his the opposite of raves, and he kind of refers to it as a history, and it's kind of and it's and he kind of says this is kind of an amazing history of Germany that you don't get in the history books because it both has what we've talked about the without going into like the inner politics because it doesn't have that there's big changes in German history and the world and society, but also yeah, clothes and houses and relationships. And I mean it starts with them buying a house. It's actually kind of a tragic story about another Jewish banker who was very wealthy and built this very grand house. And I I've been to this part of Berlin. It's near the Tiergarten, which is this amazing large park, like Central Park of Berlin, that I think used to be the hunting grounds for the Prussian nobility, and now next to it is been all become the arts and culture center because all of it was destroyed in the Second World War, and now they've rebuilt the big museums, the Neue Museum, and the Philharmonic is there, and the state library is there. So there's this whole kind of quite grand area with a park on one side, and Potsdamer Platz on the other, and but that's where these characters live, and all of the houses are destroyed in the war, but they lived in these grand houses right next to the park. And one of the characters, this he's a really minor character, but he was a very successful banker, but then he loses everything. This is the beginning of the book in the 1870s or 80s. And then he sells his grand house to another Jewish banking family, the Opners. Um, and then, and that's kind of the beginning of the house and the dinner parties, particularly their Sunday kind of lunches are a big kind of amazing scene.
Yeah, we see those lunches happening over the course of the novel and how they change in in bad and depressing ways towards the end of the novel
Yeah.
because they're quite nice affairs, all the families seated around, uh, abundant amounts of food and conversation that's kind of light and sociable and gossipy. And then by the end of the novel, when things start to go really badly with National Socialism and Hitler, and we just see their world shrinking uh, in a literal and a figurative sense, insofar as they have to start giving up parts of their house, their uh, they're living in one or two rooms of the house when they used to have the entire house, and food is short and they're selling things. And but overall, it's really not until those 100 pages, I'd say, maybe about, that we get to this really devastating uh, Holocaust kind of era, uh, World War II, and precursor to World War II uh, environment. Before that, there's just a lot of life, um, and you feel that the characters are vibrant, and they're, for the most part, enjoying their world. They're living in very interesting times, not necessarily scary times for a while, but just interesting times. I guess if there is one, we said that there's not much interiority, but if there's one philosopher in the book, and his philosophy comes through in his communication and just discussions with people, it's Uncle Waldemar, who I really, really loved. And he's a jurist and an academic. And there's a scene in the beginning of the novel where he's kind of asked to uh, make some declarations about his
I think he's asked to
religion.
convert, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, he's a very successful legal theorist, as you say, and but also an aesthete, and he's got an amazing art collection, and and yeah, he's asked to convert by some high-ranking, Prussian Bismarckian, I don't know, leader, to say, if you want your career to continue up, why don't you convert to Catholicism, and that will help. And even though he's not, in fact, he's the least religious of all of them, and most of them aren't very religious, except for the older Effinger back in the south who goes to the synagogue every day. Um, but even though he's very unreligious and is basically an atheist, he says, absolutely not, I'm not going to do that for you, which is less about religion, more about a kind of sense of, I don't know, resistance and rebellion and wanting and freedom, really.
Yeah. And he kind of upholds that resistance through the very end. And when things start going bad, he really has a clear-eyed view, I think, about, um, he can see what's happening, what's going wrong, and he's very honest with himself and with his family members about
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I think it's, as you're saying, it's. I mean, it's kind of a fun. It's a fun read up until the last 100 pages when it no longer remains fun. Um, but it's really, I found quite distressing at the towards the end. And again, about houses, I mean, the they've built one of the other character, Theodore, who's kind of the second generation, builds another amazing house, and he's kind of he's the an aesthete too of the next generation. um, and he builds this incredible house with this incredible art, and he has this amazing collection. Basically, they've got like museum grade art. And then the Nazis, who actually, and it's pretty awful. That's the ex kind of suitor of one of his sisters. Mary, or is it one of? It's not Marianne. One of the other. There's one of the other sisters who's being courted. She's the more politically active one, and who works in welfare.
That's Marianne. You're right.
That's
That's Marianne.
Marianne. Okay, yeah. She's been courted at school. There's a brilliant young left wing socialist. I've forgotten his name now. Who's courting her, and he's charming, and he's the most brilliant student, and they all talk together afterwards, and they're rebelling against their teachers, and they don't hook up. But then he marries somebody else who's even wealthier, and Marianne realizes it's because he's just looking to move up the pole, and even though she was rich, there was someone richer that he could get, and then he becomes a straight up Nazi, and takes over Theodore's house to become, or wants to take over Theodore's house to become a club for the for the National Socialist Party, which Theodore, even though he has no real options, and he can't save himself when he can't save his house, he refuses in kind of one of the acts of kind of resistance that they do. But I guess I was this is a long way of saying that I thought the book was very good of getting in the difficulties of being a German Jew, knowing, of course, that anti-Semitism has always been around and is growing and growing, but not realizing how bad it was going to get and that it was going to lead to total death, and staying. When they could have left. Lottie, the actress, actually does leave to Palestine she gets when she gets threatened in her job. She gets kicked out of the play as the lead, and they put on some incompetent to become the lead, who's an Aryan, and then she immediately leaves. But I guess my thought was that is because she's a public figure, she's quite a famous actor. She is more worried about being punished as this kind of well-known celebrity rather than normal people, who may be wealthy, but are otherwise aren't famous.
Yeah. There's a lot of principled stands that the characters take. You described the stand that Voldemort takes about, like, converting, but we also have uh, the elder Opner, the patriarch, who uh, there's a stock market crash, and every a lot of people lose their money, and they're very upset, and he's basically the only one in town that will make people whole, like uh, compensate them so that they don't lose all this money on the stock market. And then a few decades later, after World War I, when Paul and Carl's factory is now quite successful and large and making automobiles, they have to there's reparations that are due to the United States, and he's one of the we get the impression that he's one of the few businessmen that actually are very diligent about making those payments that are due. And I think that that's a really, I don't know, it's it's an interesting look into the lives of these people that are um, obviously we see them on an upwardly mobile track until things go very bad politically, but they also kind of stick to their morals, and very much do the right thing regardless of whether or not everyone around them is doing it.
Yeah, it was. I was struck when the investment banking firm loses all this money because the investments they've encouraged their clients to buy a fraudulent stock. They pay him back, and you can't imagine 2026 in the United States happening.
No, no. But apparently it was pretty surprising even back
Even
then
then,
too.
yeah, yeah. And I kind of think it was part of the scope of the time of this book is that the ups and downs of this financially of this family, but also of the nation and the world. There's a couple crashes and recoveries that these three generations go for, and I guess it's hard to people have such a kind of short memory when it comes to that, and it's kind of it was kind of an amazing part of the book.
Yeah, I agree. Um, there are. many, I think, fascinating female characters in the book. Uh, One of them is Aunt Sophie, and Sophie is a woman that uh, never marries. Um, I think that's right. Am I right on that? I don't think she
Yeah,
ever gets
yeah,
married. She has one love in her life and really never gets over him. She's beautiful. She's graceful. She's a real catch, but she always kind of stays uh, elusive to people, not in a really, I don't think, intentional way, but she's, I don't know. I found her very intriguing. I don't know about you.
yeah. I think she's kind of the tragic. She's maybe the biggest tragic, the most tragic figure in the book, because at the beginning I felt you get the sense that she might be a great artist, because she is quite talented and she's praised at art school, and she's liberated. There's kind of an interesting um, cultural changes where the elder first generations are quite uptight socially. I mean, you get the sense of women aren't meant to walk outside without an escort, and that kind of stuff. Um, and then when you get to the second and third generation, women are going out and they're dating and they're having sex before marriage. And there's very promiscuous scenes in the heyday of kind of flapper Berlin 1920s, where they're all going out to masked balls, and the suggestion is it's an orgy,
Yeah.
at these grand parties, which is also suggested just to be kind of a fad. There was this brief moment when everybody was doing that, and then everyone was like, "That was crazy, we were doing that." But yeah, Sophie doesn't, in a way, she doesn't see, even though all men fall in love with her immediately, even though she kind of looks like she might be a very talented artist, she doesn't ever get the man that she wants. She has kind of a bad affair with this. Well, she falls in love with this doctor, but he doesn't kind of choose her, and it's kind of a bit sad.
Yeah.
But she has amazing clothes.
She does have amazing clothes. And you get an idea of those clothes in detail. I was thinking, as we were talking earlier, uh, when we started recording, that it would be so interesting, I think, if you had a museum that had kind of like an Effingers display, and you would have some of these things that are described, or you know dresses from the period and china from the period, and art and all these things that are described in the book, because yeah, you get a really good sense of it with the detail of the description in the novel. But that would be, I don't know, I would go see that, because there's so many wonderful things that are mentioned in the book. But another another woman that I really thought was interesting was Eugenie. Now she's the wife of Ludwig, um, and Ludwig, Waldemar, and Selma, Emanuel Opner's wife, are all siblings, and they're from a banking family, the Goldschmidts. And um, Eugenie is of Russian stock, and she uh, she's quite the I guess you would say she's the organizer of the family and the family parties, at least for quite a long time. She kind of takes it upon herself that whenever there's going to be a wedding or anything else, like, oh, I'll make the menu. Everyone just kind of um, relies on her. And she and her sister-in-law Selma have quite a spat in, I guess, in like the middle of the book. I
Yeah,
can't even remember what they fight about, but then it's like decades before they'll even talk to each other.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a classic family feud where something
Uh-huh.
very trivial, I don't remember what it was either. They just kind of have a minor. They're minorly rude to each other at a dinner party, and then they never speak to each other ever ever again.
Right, right, right. We talked a little bit about Lottie. Marianne is she's kind of like the political rebel of the family, I guess. I got the sense that she's made a little bit of tougher stuff than the rest of the younger generations in the family. She really devotes her life to helping the poor. She gets very interested, as you mentioned, in with socialism, and has a young man that she dates for a while. That's a big socialist. It seemed that there was a big flirtation kind of with the Russian way of doing things after the revolution that a lot of the German youth got very enamored with.
Yeah, yeah, and um, she also moves to it. There's the both. She moves to Palestine and likes it,
Yes.
and stays, while Lottie, who's the more artist um, actress, um, and she flees and she makes it there eventually, but she doesn't like it and doesn't stay. But Marianne, after, yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a tragic scene. I mean, it's not maybe tragic, is not the right word. It's a horrible scene where she's been working in a welfare office for a long time, and she also is kind of beautiful, and men like her, and the younger generation, the women are going to universities. Both Lottie and Marianne are very well educated. They get into socialism, and philosophy and ideas. And Marianne works she's basically a welfare, bureaucrat filling in forms to help poor people get welfare. And her icon is a kind of rabble rousing feminist, kind of blue stocking um, leader who is ridiculed in the path to where she does, and then she becomes a Nazi too, and then they fire Marianne, who's been kind of dedicating her life to this job, and feminism and welfare, and she gets kicked out without any support from all of the people by this ex-feminist, now Nazi. It's a pretty
Well,
terrible scene.
it is, and we see a parallel of that right around the same time with Paul and the automobile factory, because a lot of the people that he's worked with for a very long time, uh, that he's trusted, they kind of turn into fascists and are spying on him, and eventually they just run him out. Basically, he's
Yeah.
he's kicked to the curb.
Yeah, and there's an interesting kind of politics in the book, because it's kind of hard to tell what side Turgot is really on. And maybe after this we can talk about Turgot. Not that we know that much, but because Paul runs a car manufacturer, big company, and he employs, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands, of people,
Yes.
and he employs these people in a time when Germany has gone through terrible financial problems after the First World War, and the international Great Depression. There's a bunch of, maybe the shortest chapters are the ones reflecting the inflation, where they start like, $1 is 1,000 marks,
Yes.
$1 is a million, $1 is a 10 million, $1 is a billion, and there are just these short chapters that are just going in the short period of time about how much inflation there is, and so people are desperate, and all anything that they had is worth nothing, and um, Paul, after the end of this kind of horrible inflation, Paul is employing all these people, and very proud of his work, and he's a workaholic. He works all the time. And then not only do kind of awful, odious Nazis come in, and one of them is a publicist promoter, and but also the workers start to think that the factory should not be owned by a rich Jew, and that should be taken over by the state or the state party, the Nazis. And Paul, of course, is like, how is this? I'm the one who's employed all these people. I've gotten all these people jobs and wages, and now they're going to give in to these incompetent, hacks in the party. So that's, kind of a capitalist idea. But then there's also characters who are socialists. So it's a bit unclear what to tell. And I guess there probably isn't really a political um, point of view of the novel or Turgot. But I brought up Turgot because I was thinking about the awful promotional figure in the car factory who turns out to be a Nazi and has been stealing from them, and as soon as he can, kicks the Effingers who built this company up to employ his brother, who is a Nazi member. Because NYRB published Turgot's other novel, Käsebier Takes Berlin, which I think was written in the 20s and it was a big hit. And it's about a newspaper some newspaper writers and editors who are looking to boost circulation, and decide that the way they're going to do this is um, invent or turn in some mediocre lounge singer into be the trend, the fad of the moment, the most popular singer in town. He has one song that everyone sings in their one summer. Um, and and they do this just by dint of publicity, and boost their magazine, and then then they throw aside this singer who thought that he actually was a talented and pop star. And then it also is about the real estate boom, about boom real estate, and kind of corruption and fraudulent, inflated deals. And that's where Turgot herself comes from, because she was a journalist. Um, she was I think she comes from a wealthy Jewish family in Berlin. So definitely this book is kind of coming from a sense of her own family. But she is also very attuned to trends and the legal system. I guess she was most famous in Germany, in Berlin, and she wrote for a big newspaper um, there, and she covered the legal system and court cases. So that was her background. And the Käsebier in Berlin was a big hit when it came out in the 20s, but she wasn't able to publish Effingers until well after the war, and it didn't get very well. Nobody read it when it came out in the 40s or even 50s.
Yeah, I think one of the saddest aspects of her life with this book, which she wrote in exile, is something that Sophie de Vournoy mentions in the very good afterword, that you know she finished the book and it was published after the war was over, but it was about people that no longer existed, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Yeah, there are no Jews in Berlin anymore who can relate to the world that they're talking about. And also, I guess that the Germans either are repressing um, what their nation did, or guilty, or aren't, or suffering, and don't want to read about what has happened. But that changes at some point, and the book does become, it gets republished later, and is successful, and is still read um, in Germany. And in fact, I think actually is quite a big deal. And Sophie was in her afterwards says that one of the main streets right around there near Potsdamer Platz is called
Yes.
Tergitstrasse. So that's pretty major, because that would be a kind of well populated, trafficked street.
Yeah, and just for reference for our viewers, I haven't read the other book that you guys published by her, but it's a much shorter book than
Yeah,
this one, correct?
yeah, it's much shorter.
So
Yeah,
if you'd like to try her and need a little appetizer before you take on the main meal, maybe that's a good way to go.
yeah. It's kind of a classic. Yeah, 20s. It's got that flapper vibe. Everyone's partying, and things are happening and changing at this kind of amazing, remarkable rate, and it's like everything changes in a day. Which kind of happens in this book, but the time scale is so big. It's kind of it's like a very different style and project.
Yeah, I mentioned that there are 151 chapters in the book, all of them short chapters, but for some of them she does some interesting. I don't know quite what word I would use to describe it, but there are a few chapters where she'll reuse the phrase, like it's a beautiful spring day on June 7th, 89 at 9 a.m., and then like she'll repeat that phrase like at different times.
Yeah, it's like a
And
refrain.
yes, and in other places she'll talk about uh, you know, the whole kind of international commerce, and she'll
Yeah,
talk about you know they're loading cotton from the United States
yeah.
picked
Black
by
people in
slaves.
America are,
Yeah,
yeah, are working
yeah,
on cotton farms. Um, yeah, there's they're kind of connecting the world to these characters, and um, yeah.
and I
And
think
then
it's
I guess in the
interesting.
moment when the depression hits, that refrain changes slightly, because then it's not just what's happening in Germany; it's all over the world. These things have stopped, and I guess
Yeah,
these things meaning in commerce.
I was going to make the point very similar to yours that it feels like we get those refrains about international commerce not at the in the first 300 pages of the book, but only after the world just Germany becomes part of the world. In the first little bit, it's still very insular Germany, and no one is really talking about much. I mean, there's some references to like going to America and making it rich or whatever.
The other thing that's interesting in this book is the Jewishness, which we kind of briefly went over in the beginning, um, because they're all Jewish. All of the characters, all of the main characters in this book, and the one of the patriarchs on the Effinger side, as we said, is quite religious, even though he's in. And it struck me as, um, I never really thought of Bavaria, smaller towns, artsman, watchmaker, as being Jewish, but that's what he is, and he's the most religious one, and he goes to synagogue every day at 5 in the morning, or 6 in the morning, and the Berlin Jews who are actually don't seem that religious to me. Did you agree?
I did agree. And what one of the things I found interesting, and I can't remember whether this was in Michael Hoffman's review or whether it's in Sophie's afterward. I'm sorry. Apologies to both of them. But someone makes the point that the word kosher doesn't show up
Mm,
anywhere in this book,
yeah,
which is kind of to your point. And
yeah.
Sophie also makes the point that how fast Berlin grew in like that in an 80-year period. I think she says that like in 1829 there were 200,000 people that lived in Berlin, and then by the turn of the century there's like 2 million. I mean, so many people, and obviously coming from a lot of different places. But yeah, I it is it is remarkable that, this is a book about um, Jewish families and the consequences eventually of being a Jewish family in the 1930s and 40s in Germany. But they wear their Jewishness very lightly, except for, as you said, the watchmaker back in the little town.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the other scene, and I think again Sophie mentions this in her afterwards, which is quite clear, which is quite telling, is, and this is, I guess, contradicting what I said before. James, one of the younger sons, who is he's kind of a ne'er do well. He's a playboy. He's considered very handsome. He never really gets a job, but he dresses well and he dates lots and lots of people. I can't remember now where it happens, but he's somewhere and he's basically has to recite a Hebrew prayer, and he's able to do it immediately. He knows the Hebrew liturgy, um, and so he's grown up Jewish, and even though you there is no scenes of him in Hebrew school, and there isn't really any scenes of all the scenes with him are him seducing young women in parks, but he obviously is Jewish, and that was quite a telling scene.
Yeah, I kind of thinking about this a little further, they really the Berliners in these two families don't really demonstrate or practice their Jewishness, yet everyone in the city knows that they are Jewish. And I'm presuming that that was not an unusual circumstance or situation, but it is kind of curious how it could be so obvious to everyone that they're Jewish, even though they're not going to synagogue and they're not keeping kosher, and they're not doing some of the things that you would think would make that obvious to the public.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they socialize. I think in a way it kind of feels like it's a social thing. They're Jewish. They grow up Jewish without too much religion in their lives, at least the Berlin side. But their social set are like them. They're all similar kind of bourgeois Jewish people, and but they feel quite German. Even they're quite patriotic, and even you know intellectual aesthetic Waldemar um, feels quite patriotic. They're very pro. A lot of the older generation are very pro Bismarck. They are very involved. They're all active in the First World War. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that was Voldemort was such a tragic character to me, because you're right. I I feel like he really loves Germany, but he sees how the national socialists are destroying the country and destroying the civilization and the culture, and because he sees that so clear eyed, that just makes it all the more sad, I think.
yeah. No, they definitely kind of believe in Enlightenment values that they think the German the German state, embodies in a way. They kind of look up to England a lot, and there's obviously a bit of rivalry with England. And actually, one of the um, second generation brothers goes to Germany and never comes, and it falls out of their family, seemingly because his son joins. He's a German who immigrates to Berlin to London, and he does well in business. He marries an English woman and have a kid, and then the son joins the English army in the First World War and dies, and that seems to be the reason that he will never talk to his German brothers again, ever again, and he basically disappears from the book. But the rest of them, they kind of believe, yeah, that Germany is a place that, that believes in progress, and I guess, secular values and rational values coming from, no doubt, Bismarckian forms of statehood and product, national productive ventures that all falls apart, and they kind of don't really see it coming. But and I guess it's important, we talked about this before, but they're not victims, these characters. I mean, horrible things happen to them, um, but for 700 pages of 800 page novel, they're leading sometimes sad, sometimes disappointing, but quite exciting, adventurous lives together in a family.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that Marianne, uh, she gets kicked out of the organization that she helped fund, the charity organization, and she moves to Palestine. And in fact, Lottie, the actress, her daughter Susie, ends up living in Palestine with Mary Ann and gets engaged to a guy there. But there is this sense that at least Valdemar expresses it, that trying to trying to create a separate homeland for Jewish people is not the answer. That's kind of anti-enlightenment, I guess.
Yeah,
That you would try to say, oh, we can't all live together. We need our own separate places because coexistence is not tenable.
yeah. And Valdemar grew up, loves European art, and he has an amazing collection. That's what he, admires, and studying, legal theories, no doubt, descending from Descartes or whatever. And so that's who he is, even though he's Jewish, even though there is anti-Semitism that has hurt his career. Um, he still lives in that world. But at the
Yeah.
same side, it gets pretty shitty at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I don't What did you think about the ending of the novel? I think it works for this novel. Um and it does go shitty in the end, but it doesn't go as shitty as a lot of novels that are dealing with uh Jewish people in Europe in World War II.
Yeah.
Um I don't quite know what I want to say about that, but it's more of a there aren't details of concentration camps and exterminations and things like that. It's more just this sense of dread that I felt that yeah, gee,
Yeah.
like this is going to happen to these people like it happened to so many people.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, it's the it's the end it's the end of a world, which is the Jewish German world. Um, and I guess this book it's a description not of the entire German Jewish life, but a particular part of it, wealthy Berlin cosmopolitan German Jewish life, and that and there is a little bit in the South with the artisan, but not really. Um, and obviously, all of it is over, but this book is taken with the Berlin class, and it's gone, and that's gone and disappeared. And I mean, I guess a lot of the characters that we've spent quite a lot of time with have already died before the Nazis come to power, the first generation, and Voldemar survives until the end, but he's really old by the time the Nazis come, so it's kind of considered just an end. And then, I mean, it's pretty brutal what happens to Paul
Yes.
and what happens to Marianne, but Marianne survives. Does Paul survive? I can't even remember.
I think Paul lives. Yes, I mean he goes once he's kicked out of the factory. Like a few days later, he's arrested because they
Yeah,
trump up some charges, fraud, and corruption, and all this stuff. But then he eventually does get out of jail.
yeah.
Um, but I don't think he dies before the end of the book, unless I'm
No, I mean,
misremembering.
I'm looking. The last chapter is a letter from Paul at 81 in 1942, and the suggestion kind of is that he probably does get killed or die of old age, and but he is 81 and he lived this remarkable life, rather than the kind of, and the younger generation gets out. Lottie gets out. Lottie, who flees when they come for her at the theater, to arrest her. She first goes to France or Switzerland, and then she goes to Palestine, and she doesn't like it. But the suggestion is she doesn't go back to Germany. Um, and Marianne is kind of acclimatized to Palestine. And does Irwin make it out?
I think yes. I think Irwin
He meets.
goes. Irwin is
Yeah,
Lottie's husband, and I think
yeah,
I think he goes to meet her. I don't know
yeah.
what happens to Emmanuel, the son, but I think they take Emmanuel with them too.
I think they take him with him.
I think
Yeah,
it's just Susie that's in Palestine, and she's okay
yeah,
with
yeah.
Marianne.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't quite have the horrific um, aspects of some other books from the time period. And I guess Gabriele Tergit herself gets out, and she, I think, I can't remember the exact story, but she leaves Germany probably to France first, and then she gets to London, and she lives in London for the rest of her life. Um, So she's kind of, I guess, perhaps it is reflecting on people who are able to get out.
Yeah, she I think writes most of this book from London. I think I
Mm,
remember either
yeah,
London or Paris.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess now that we're talking about it, the ending is pretty horrible. I wouldn't want to candy coat it, if not, even if there aren't scenes in concentration camps or death camps. Um, but perhaps the bulk of the book is. Well, I don't know. I was going to say the bulk of the book is the 700 pages before that about this kind of quite vibrant world, and then that falls apart. But actually, the last 100 pages is quite serious. And what do you think? Am
Yeah,
I-
I guess my takeaway from the book is that it's such a wonderful depiction of just how the country and the society changed over the course of those 70 years. I mean, it's really remarkable. We go from a tiny town in Bavaria, with the father, supporting the family by making watches one at a time, and we get to a world known car manufacturing factory and facility, and all of the political changes and the economic changes and World War One. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if someone were going to write a history or write something like this in this style of the last 70 years of U.S. history, and read it, 100 years from now, maybe it would seem like, oh wow, like so much was changing so quickly then. And I guess maybe that's just the way life works, but I found it fascinating to
Yeah.
just witness the changes along with,
Yeah.
with the
Yeah. No, it's
characters.
I think it's a remarkable book, and the as well as what you were saying about the historicity of it all, the way it's told is pretty remarkable. I mean, as you were saying earlier, these very the lack of interiority, which is true. You don't you it's really just dialogue and kind of set pieces. There's not too many. You barely ever get into any character's thoughts, as you said. Um, it's done very well, and it moves very quickly. I mean, it didn't take me too long to read. It's a 800-page book.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that's one thing. That's it's in my staff recommendations at my bookstore, and and what I'm going to tell people, because so often people kind of expect this of me right now, that what are you reading? What are you liking? That I'm going to give them a doorstop. But the thing that I can, with all honesty, say about this one is that it's not going to feel like it's 800 pages. You're gonna, it's gonna, it's gonna keep your interest. There's no boggy, sloggy parts to it like there are in so many big books. Big long books where you like it, but it's like, there's 150 pages where they were doing X, got
Yeah,
really kind of slow, and I had a hard time keeping my attention. That doesn't happen at all in this book.
yeah, I agree.
Well, Nick, it was so great to talk to you about this, and
Thanks for having me.
uh, keep on doing the great work at New York Review of Books. And I can't wait to have you come back on and talk about another book with
I
me.
will. I will definitely do that.
All right, take care.
Thank you.